Stanford University.
Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 11th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design, and it's my distinct honor and delight to be welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Andrew Holecek, who will be teaching on the topic of transforming obstacles into opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Holecek, who has completed the traditional 3-year Buddhist meditation retreat and offers seminars internationally on the art of dying, meditation, and lucid dreaming. He is the author of many books, including Preparing to Die, Practical Advice and Spiritual Wisdom from the Tibetan Buddhist Tradition, and Dream Yoga, Illuminating Your Life Through Lucid Dreaming and the Tibetan Yogas of Sleep. Holecek is a member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and the author of scientific papers on lucid dreaming. His work has appeared in Parabola, Lion's Roar, Tricycle, Utne Reader, Buddha Dharma, Light of Consciousness, and many other periodicals. He holds degrees in classical music, biology, and a doctorate in dental surgery. Join me in welcoming Andrew Holecek.
Thank you, Tia. Thanks for the gracious introduction. And what an honor and delight to be with you all and to join such an extraordinary panel of esteemed presenters. So thank you to Tia, thank you to Stanford, everybody behind the scenes who makes these events take place. So it is such an honor for me. It's such a delight to share one of the true passions in my life. Really, I would say one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given in this life. I sometimes playfully refer to it as a gift in ugly wrapping paper, I suppose. And these are the teachings that deal with the end of life, death and dying from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, known as the Bardo teachings, B-A-R-D-O, where Bardo means gap, transitional process, or in between. This term is entering the public domain, as you may well know. The experimental novel by George Saunders, Lincoln and the Bardo, is a bestseller. The movie, literally by the title Bardo, and a host of other books are starting to get this term out there. It archetypally refers, if you believe in this sort of thing, to the gap between lives. But as we'll see, it's a highly multivalent principle, which means it adheres and abides and helps us understand the gaps between any two states of consciousness. And so what this implies, that's quite compelling, is whether we know it or not, we're always in a bardo. We're always in between two other different states. And so the Bardo principles themselves are intimately connected to the narrative, the title of this event, the power of the pause, right? I mean, Bardo Yoga, which is the set of practices and contemplations that officially engage this principle, it's all about the power of the pause, taking a gap. And so with this in mind, just the spirit of this, I'm going to say a lot more about this in my upcoming 2 presentations about meditation in particular, but I want to start with you with, this is a legitimate practice. It comes from the Mahamudra tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. I use it all the time. It's quite literally a one breath meditation session. It's just as simple as it sounds. For the duration of one inhalation, right? Life starts when you take a breath. One exhalation, life ends when you take your final breath, and sandwiched between this is the entirety of our lives. And so I really work with this short practice a lot. I refer to it, think of it as a sip of space. It's a way to use the power of the pause to ventilate our otherwise congested, contracted daily lives in our minds. It's a way to let your mind breathe, to let your mind settle. So literally, for the duration of one inhalation and one exhalation, let's just touch in. That's it. First meditation session done for today, right? Here's Bardo Yoga on the spot. Extraordinarily, potent, powerful, applicable little sip of space that can help us ventilate our reality. So the gift of the Bardo teachings for me has also, and this is important, has removed really all fear of death. For as Marie Curie said so brilliantly, nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we fear less. So the aspiration of my time with you is really to become fearless in the face of impermanence and death by understanding these processes, the phenomenology of what's actually taking place. And so the fear of death really comes about largely because we do not understand it. We're always afraid of what we don't know. Fear and ignorance are virtually synonymous, but armed with the right view, and this is really a large part of what I'm going to be engaging with you, we have actually everything to look forward to at the moment of life, at the moment of death, believe it or not. I mean, the great poet Rumi said so beautifully, death is our wedding with eternity. So I suppose somewhat tongue-in-cheek, my time with you, you can look at it as a proposal from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition to unite, an invitation to unite with eternity. Sounds pretty good to me. It's up to you whether or not you accept this proposal. So for me, the Bardo teachings have not only removed my fear of death, but just as importantly, reflecting on impermanence and death, reflecting on these teachings has brought me more fully into life. I'm going to be saying more about this extraordinary scroll or tanka in a minute. But right now, I just want you to pay attention to the entity, the demon, who holds the wheel of life, which is basically a reflection of our existence. And so his name is Yama, literally the Lord of Death. And so we may not feel his squeeze just yet, but it would do well. We would do well to feel his cold breath on the back of our neck, because this might give us pause, another power of the pause, to reflect on what really matters. What can you take with you? What really counts in life? So but this is really of some importance for me, the kind of the applicability, the practicality of these teachings. Samuel Johnson once said this, the author of the first English dictionary. He wrote, when a man knows, or a woman, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. Little gallows humor there, but isn't it true, right? What would you do? It's a really powerful reflection. What would you do if you knew you only had 6 months left to live? What would you continue doing? What would you take out? What would you do if you knew you only had a month to live? A week? A day? What would you continue doing? What would you take out? So these teachings and these practices that bring them into life, really, it's like using death as your advisor. It's a way to bring impermanence and death more fully into life. So another really powerful contemplation along these lines is imagine that you're on your deathbed right now, surrounded by your loved ones. At that moment, of what value is your stock portfolio, your IRA, your car, your boat, your worldly possessions, your reputation? Well, is it entirely possible that that's their inherent value right now? So I reflect on this stuff as a type of, remember Marie Kondo, right? The wonderful Japanese lady, she made such a huge splash a couple of years ago. Her wonderful little teachings, exhortations on cleaning out your closet, right? Trimming things, simplifying life. Well, these teachings are kind of a Marie Kondo for your life to simplify. What do you really need? Really, what's important to you? What can you take with you? So when the Buddha, the awakened one, that's what his name literally means, when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree some 2,600 years ago, it was actually his contemplation on impermanence and death, what came to be called the supreme contemplation, actually led to his awakening. And so the maxim here is, of all footprints, the footprint of the elephant is the deepest and most supreme. Of all contemplations, the contemplations on impermanence and death are the deepest and most supreme. So contrary to being kind of morbid, morose, goth type meditation, I promise you, these teachings, these practices are some of the most impactful, transformative things to bring you more fully into life. Nothing will make you live with more gusto, with more attention to the preciousness and the fragility of life than reflecting on the end of it. And so Bardo Yoga, this is the actual form of yoga in the Tibetan tradition, is a kind of a mental yoga. You assume these kind of cognitive asanas, cognitive postures and mudras of mind that are designed to stretch your mind and heart open. And we'll see in my upcoming two offerings around meditation, especially when I work with the practice of open awareness, this narrative of openness and expansion is enormous. One of the ways I actually look at death these days, and I'll say so much more about this later, is really it's a kind of a grand opening. So the narrative of openness is colossal. My favorite definition for meditation, by the way, is literally habituation to openness. So much more on this a little bit later. But the invitation here is if we can follow in the awakened one's footsteps, the Buddhas from any tradition, but in this case, the particular historical Buddha, it can lead us to these same liberating insights. And so really, in more kind of modern techno-speak, the Buddha was an extraordinary microphenomenologist. So phenomenology is the study of experience. Microphenomenology is exactly what it sounds like, taking a really close, precise look at things, examining things to see what really is this thing called death in this instance. And so this is what the Buddha did. He sat underneath the tree and he started at the end with this thing called death. And in a type of, this is my languaging, a kind of 12-step detox process, this 12-step method that are known as the 12 links of dependent origination, or the 12 nidanas. You can see these 12 links depicted on the outermost circle of this wheel. So this particular journey that the Buddha took is really archetypally represented in this most famous of all tankas or scrolls. You'll find it on the outside of virtually every monastery, especially in Nepal, northern India, Tibet, and Mongolia. It's referred to as literally the intellectual content of enlightenment. So this is what the Buddha discovered when he sat under the tree 2,600 years ago and took a very, very close look at the nature of reality and the nature of his own mind. And so he started with this thing called death. That's the 12th link at the very top, uppermost left. And he worked his way back in a highly analytic, insightful, contemplative way, kind of a first-person scientific way. He worked his way back to what is it that causes and conditions this thing we call death. And so if we click all the way back around to the very, so the 12th nidana is upper left. Actually, if it's facing out, it's upper right. And the first nidana, way up on the upper right, is really ignorance, depicted by a blind grandmother. Blindness representing being lost in the darkness of ignorance. And so the extraordinary gift of these teachings is that by transforming the first nidana, ignorance, into wisdom, replacing the blindness of the archetypal blind grandmother with perfectly pure insight, we'll talk about that in just a second, by replacing ignorance with wisdom, blindness with insight, we can illuminate and therefore eliminate this thing called death, transforming it into enlightenment, literally a once in a lifetime opportunity, transforming the greatest obstacle in life, arguably the end of it, into the greatest opportunity. Boy, this is a lot of promise. But here's the thing. If we engage in the map that describes this outrageous proclamation, then we bring that map into our territory, into our experience with the contemplations and meditations to follow. Test this for yourself. See if it's not true. This is what the Buddha allegedly said. Do not take what I say for granted. Test my teachings against your own experience. Work out your own salvation with diligence. So this gives a notion of right view, real traction. This is the first and most important of the Eightfold Noble Path in the Buddhist tradition that, in fact, led to the Buddha's awakening. And the idea here with right view, almost like this X-ray vision that's developed, it allows us to penetrate through the darkness of death, replacing the darkness of ignorance with the light of awareness, which replaces the blind grandmother that gives birth. You've heard this term samsara, I'm sure. It's the world of conventional confused existence, kind of set in contradistinction to nirvana, which everybody's heard of. Well, these teachings replace samsara brought about by the blind grandmother with the eyesight, the insight of the sighted mother, the perfectly sighted mother of all the Buddhas. And her name is the great mother Prajnaparamita. So this is what Prajnaparamita looks like. She is literally the mother of your own awakened mind. She represents, mythologically, archetypally, the awakened dimension of your experience that this tradition asserts is what you're going to actually fall into as the mind falls into itself in the process of death and dying. And as we'll see later in this talk, what happens in analogous fashion every single night when we fall asleep. So in order to refine this importance, the centrality of right view, I've always found it very helpful using the kind of Gestalt principles that perception is always generated in contrast. To better understand and appreciate the power of right view, it helps, I think, to provisionally understand what is it that constitutes wrong view? What is it that constitutes the blindness of the grandmother? Well, irreducibly, the wrong view in these wisdom traditions is the wrong view of materialism, physicalism, kind of degraded, reductionist, flatland view, whereas my dear friend Ken Wilber says it so eloquently. I love this line. Everything in the manifest world can be reduced to the play of frisky dirt. That it's all fundamentally the play of matter, that mind is an epiphenomena of matter. This gives rise to a host of problems, not least of which is what's called, for many neurologists that are here, I notice are presenting and attending, the so-called insoluble hard problem of consciousness. That's just one problem that arises from this wrong view. But the whole host of pathologies, I could argue, what constitutes the meta crisis today is, now this is healthy reductionism, can be healthily reduced to this pathological wrong view. And so with this wrong view that we all subscribe to, and I invite you to take a look. If you are anxious of death, if you're afraid of death, it is directly proportional to the degree of your subscription to this view. So overthrowing this view, this view, what I call the tyranny of appearance, overthrowing the tyranny of appearance of this materialistic view is in fact what these teachings are all about. So with this wrong view, which is no view at all, pretty depressing, death is lights out, game over. And so in this regard, right, the Western view, death is a defeat, summarized, I think, really beautifully by the historian Arnold Toynbee when he once said, death is un-American. Why? Because defeat is un-American. Or actually, my favorite one, Jack LaLanne. Now, this dates me. Jack LaLanne was my famous favorite fitness guru way back when. He said something that's just so spot on. He said, I can't die. It would wreck my image. And so these summations, these views are basically, to me, irreducibly summarized in this poem by Dylan Thomas, very, very famous. You've heard it before. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Well, with all due respect, nice poetry, but not the best advice. We burn, rave, and rage against the dying of the light because we don't know, we don't understand with our wrong view that the night is good and that the light is not dying. So my counter to this is kind of the one way archetypally to talk about the summation of the right view. This comes from the Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore, where he says, this is an extraordinary statement. Death is not extinguishing the light. It is only putting out the lamp because dawn has come. I mean, that is so exquisite. That's so beautiful. But playfully, dawn only comes for those who wake up early enough in life to see it. Precisely the enterprise of the Bardo teachings and reflections on impermanence and death. Precisely why we're going to be exploring and, more importantly, practicing death. You can absolutely positively die before you die by practicing letting go before you're forced to let go. So this wrong view, it's not just a philosophical issue. This has real world implications. So check out some of these stats. About 20% of deaths occur in the ICU. Well, this costs anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 a day. 1% of the population accounts for about 30% of healthcare costs. More than half of Medicare is spent on patients who die within 2 months. And so without advanced directives, right, caregivers and family err on the appropriately named artificial life versus authentic death. And they do so because, of course, they think that death is a defeat. 1.4 million Americans are so frail, they only survive with a feeding tube. Over 30,000 Americans are kept alive in a comatose or permanently vegetative state. And over $25 billion a year is spent keeping people alive on ventilators. So this wrong view, this isn't just philosophical armchairing. This has profound applications to how we live our lives and to what expense we go to prevent the unpreventable. All based really on this wrong view that death is a defeat. It's not a defeat. It's just a defeat, as we'll see, to all things material, all things based on form. I'm going to get to that in just a second. So let's transition now to the right view, to the good news thing. And so we're going to shoot right to the top. These teachings come from what is called the Tantric tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, also called Vajrayana. And a unique feature of the Tantra or the Vajrayana is it's called a fruition of vehicle. You start at the top. You start with the very highest teachings. And then the process is one of integration, stabilization, and incorporation. The religious scholar Houston Smith had it so beautifully summarized when he said, the process of the path, paraphrasing him, is to transform flashes of illumination into abiding light. And so here's a flash of illumination, proclaimed really unconditionally, not only by the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but really the world's non-dual wisdom traditions, summarized in a song, what's called a doha, a song of realization. This gentleman's name is Tsangpa from Tibet. And this is just such a beautiful summary. When it's time to leave this body, this illusionary tangle, don't cause yourself anxiety and grief. The thing that you should train in and clear up for yourself, there's no such thing as dying to be done. There's just clear light, the mother, and child clear light uniting. When mind forsakes the body, sheer delight. Wow. Now there's a view. When mind forsakes the body, sheer delight. I'm going to say a lot more in my meditation talk about what the clear light represents, the clear light mother and the clear light child. Briefly, the clear light mother is represented by the great mother Prajnaparamita, the mother of the matrix of reality, the mother of your awakened mind. The child clear light, sometimes also called the child luminosity, is your degree of recognition of that. And this is precisely what we're going to be working with in the upcoming meditation sessions. What does it mean to become a child of luminosity? What does that really mean? How can we actually do it right now? It's actually easier than you think. Absolutely, positively. So this fruitional view leads to the death of death. I can't imagine a greater gift. Death is only the end if you think the story is about you. The you story, a sad story scripted poorly by a terrible author called Ego with a really bad ending called death. And so the Bardo teachings offer an entirely fresh narrative, one that actually never ends, because you see, the story is not about you because there isn't one. A harsh, noble truth that's fundamentally pointed out on the journey of death. And as we'll see when we explore the nocturnal meditations, in a concordant fashion, this happens every single night when we fall asleep. And armed with the nocturnal meditations, we can see this for ourselves. So death, just like sleep and dream, which we'll explore, deconstructs the narrative of the self-sense. We start to really see in a first-person way that who we think we are is literally nothing more than a story. It's a construct. It's a narrative, just like death itself. And because it is a construct, they can both be deconstructed and de-reified. This is where we're going to fundamentally be going. But in order to acknowledge, this is what's important here. So in the wisdom traditions, it's really important to centrifuge out the difference between relative and absolute truth. This is important. Relative truth is the truth of conventionality. It's truth as we know it in the world of science, where the laws of space, time, causality, physics, conventional science apply. We can't deny that. If we do, that's spiritual bypassing, that's nihilism, and that's problematic. But this is also the world of appearance, conventional truth. So we're trying to overthrow the tyranny of conventional appearance, and this intimates something deeper, more compelling, more true, more profound, the realm of the absolute. And so in the realm of relative reality, in the world of form, absolutely, something obviously does end. And that is form, body, form itself, and the level of development that is associated with it. In other words, what this means, along with the body that dies, is this narrative of ego, the structure. Ego structure dies. Why? Because ego is nothing more than exclusive identification with form. Even Freud said this. Ego is first and foremost a body ego. And so along with this are these profound developmental concerns and issues that ego is really an arrested form of development, exclusive identification with form. And my playful language is evolution under house arrest. And so when this arrest is basically suspended and released as the house burns down when we die, rapid opportunities, powerful opportunities for transformation and growth take place. Obstacle is transformed into opportunity with these degrees of preparation. So what dies, another way to say this in contemporary language, is fake news. Fake news dies to reveal the true news of who we really are, right? So the goal of this tradition and the other wisdom traditions, summarized by my dear friend, I think he's one of the greatest living Buddhist philosophers on the planet today, David Loy. He writes this. This is such a wonderful summation. If we can realize that there is no delineated ego self that is alive now, the problem of life and death is solved. Such is the Buddhist goal, to experience, to discover that which cannot die because it was never born. Remarkable. So the implications here are quite profound. They're in the innermost dimension of your being. There is a dimension that does not grow old, that does not get sick, that does not die, literally called the changeless nature in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So when people have this intuition, I do myself, when people have this intuition that I can't die, there's part of me that's not going to die. Well, there's some real truth to that, but there's also some falsity. What is going to die is this fake news, this false narrative structure of the ego sense. That's going to perish with the body. So the intuition is correct. There is part of you that will not die because there is part of you that was never born. All the wisdom, non-dual wisdom traditions, especially the non-dual ones, radically proclaim this. And so if we can transfer the portfolio of our identity structure from these most superficial dimensions that are associated with form and its beautification and materialism and everything else, this is a real IRA. This is an immortality retirement account. If we can transfer our resources into these truer dimensions of our being, precisely what the meditative traditions do, precisely what the nocturnal meditations do, we can actually die before we die, before this is brought about in death's uncompromising and non-negotiable terms. So this truest dimension of your being, literally in Sanskrit, is called Dharma Kaya, body of truth. This is the 12th link transformed. So death transforms into the Dharmakaya. The greatest obstacle in life, death, transforms into enlightenment itself, the Dharmakaya. You don't think this is going to change the way you live your life and the way you approach the end of it? If you know in your bones through studying this stuff, and most importantly, kicking the tires, testing these teachings against your experience, doing these contemplations and practices, this is a game changer. Instead of having such terror and anxiety about the unknown, perhaps you actually have something to look forward to. So a couple of supporting statements here, because I realize these are pretty outrageous proclamations. So there's a host of supporting statements. Here's just a few. First from the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. It's not just the Eastern wisdom traditions that espouse these, but the Western ones as well. So this is what he says. The individual itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. And this is not a confused state, but the clearest of the clearest and the surest of the surests, the weirdest of the weirdest, utterly beyond words, where death was almost a laughable impossibility. The loss of personality seeming not an extinction, but the only true life. So Thich Nhat Hanh, again, to juxtapose East and West going back and forth, he has a very playful, lovely way of looking at this. He said, we have to get rid of this ridiculous, fallacious notion of birthdays and replace them with continuation days. Because in the realm of absolute truth, real news, there is no such thing as death. It is a construct. It is therefore something that can be deconstructed. And this is something we're going to be doing, my riff today, and then more importantly, really more importantly, the contemplations and the meditations that bring this into your life and then into death. So the question is really the invitation, the proposal, will we in fact be ready for this rapid accelerated opportunity of evolution that comes at the end of life? If so, as it says in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, recognition and liberation are simultaneous. This is the extraordinary capacity of working with lucidity at the kind of the upper reaches of it. My dear friend Christopher Beisch, who wrote this extraordinary book, Professor of Religion, 5 some years ago, he wrote this mind-bending book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe, really insightful book. And in this book, he writes, death disappears as an interpretive category because in the absolute truth of oneness, we discover that there never have been any separate parts to life in the first place. So there can be no death of a part. Here, only illusion dies. And then a final one from Rabindranath Tagore. I find these actually quite helpful to substantiate these otherwise outrageous claims. This is what he says. We are afraid of death because we are afraid of the absolute cessation of our personality. Therefore, if we realize the person, now this is person with a capital P, associated basically with the Hindu notion of self, big S. If we realize the person, capital P, is the ultimate reality, which we know in everything that we know, we find our own personality in the bosom of the eternal. To realize with the heart and mind the divine being who dwells within us is to be assured of everlasting life. When we realize not merely through our intellect, but through our heart, strong with the strength of its wisdom, that Mahatma, the infinite person, dwells in you, which is in me, we cross over the region of death. Death only concerns our limited self, end quote. And I could go on and on for hours going back and forth, east, west, north, and south, of all the traditions, philosophies, shamanic traditions that proclaim and echo and support the same truth. So if you look at this really properly, this is the way I've come to view this thing called death. It's nothing more, with the right view, than a wrathful form of liberation. And it's only wrathful because it's uncompromising and non-negotiable. But here's the kicker, see, this is what we're doing. It doesn't have to be wrathful. We only have to die before we die, which is precisely the role of these teachings and the role of meditation. You'll find this exhortation. I've tried to track down the original attribution here. I found it in the Zen tradition. I found it in Sufism. I found it in Christian mysticism. I can't track down where it originally came from. But you've heard this one. It's so compelling. If you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. Amazing. If you let go, letting go is just a euphemism for death. If you let go on your terms, titrating it, this death principle, if you let go on your terms before you're forced to let go, that's the uncompromising, wrathful, non-negotiable part, then death really no longer has any meaning. You've died before you died. So for me, in 45 years of engaging in these practices and teachings, including my 3-year retreat, I'm sure deeper practitioners here will echo the same thing. Spiritual path in general, meditation in particular, death in slow motion. Death in slow motion. You're learning how to die before you die. This is the great Socratic proclamation, right? The genuine philosopher is really one who practices dying. So this is fundamentally the charter. This is the enterprise. Get to the point by doing all the releasing, letting go, where we can get at the moment of death, relax into the moment of death and say, with a smile on the inside, as the journey of the Bardos takes place, been there, done that. Been there, done that. And so, in order to work with these practices, there are a number of ways to work with these. I want to emphasize a little bit the extraordinary role of the nocturnal meditations. I want to talk a little bit about these and give you actually a couple contemplations to work with to start to actually bring these teachings into our system, because this is important. The great wisdom traditions, and in particular, I'm speaking with a little bit more authority about Hinduism and Buddhism, the traditions I've studied the most. They have a very sophisticated pedagogical approach that's really of some importance here. I've been intimating it, but now it's time to throw a dart specifically at it. It comes from the deeper divers who may be listening from what's called the Pramana tradition, the treatises on logic, epistemology, and valid cognition. They talk about this tripartite threefold approach of hearing, contemplating, and meditating. This is what perhaps separates my presentation and some of the other presentations from so-called contemplatives in this program from the more academic approaches. And I'm not criticizing any of it. But the traditional approach of pedagogy is really involved this kind of top-down thing. Again, no criticism whatsoever. Information is disseminated, you're studying, you're listening, you're learning, you're ingesting the information. This is the hearing phase. Well, the great contribution of the wisdom traditions is taking this, because a real issue these days in this information age is definitely TMI, the inability to walk the talk. So how do we take these amazing teachings and bring them into our system? How can we take these teachings and literally incorporate them, bring them into our soma, so that not only do they help us at the end of our lives, but they're of profound and estimable benefit to others. So if you go through this tripartite integral and pedagogical approach, the teachings quite literally become you. And you can feel this in the presence of great beings who have done this work. For example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His Tibetan name is Kundin, which literally means presence. You can feel the quality of this pedagogical approach in the people who have really done this deep inner work. This is important in the end-of-life business. If you work as a hospice person, or if you want to be of benefit to someone who's dying in addition to yourself, these teachings can literally change the fabric of your being. As I playfully say, transform cerebral data into somatic fiber. Your very presence can be of profound benefit to people as they're going through the end-of-life journey. They will actually be magnetized to your stability, the strength of your mind. you will come to represent with your mere presence that which they are losing, which is this quality of stability and ground. And so going through this process and knowing about it is no small thing. So hearing is what I'm doing with me flapping my lips. It's what you're doing when you're reading. Ingesting. Second phase, contemplation, the lost art of contemplation. You start to massage the teachings into your system. This is the digestion phase. You reflect on them, you turn them over, you mulch on them. You're literally starting to bring them into your system, waking down into the wisdom of your body. And this is, you may have discovered this, it's the most amazing thing. Deception cannot follow you into your body. This is the basis of things like lie detectors. So the other thing that takes place with this pedagogical approach is you're going through this kind of filtration and purification system, filtering and purifying dualistic concept itself. As you go into the contemplation phase, you're purifying the concepts. They're becoming more embodied, less conceptual. And then when you enter this final dimension of the meditations, ingest, digest, metabolize. This is when the teachings enter your system. They quite literally become you. And this is also extraordinarily impactful because according to especially the Tibetan tradition, this recapitulates the journey that takes place when we die. As the mind falls into itself, it's falling into the center of itself. And we can take this fall before we're forced to at the end of life. Every time we fall asleep, we reiterate this. And moment to moment, we can fall into these dimensions in deep meditation. So ingest, digest, metabolize, filtering, purifying concept into non-dual experience. This is when you know, this is true Gnosticism. This is when you have those aha moments and you got it. And so in a certain way, those of you who are students of the Buddhist tradition, this particular assertion comes from the Yogacara tradition, literally means derived from yoga or derived from insight yoga practice. This is precisely what takes place in the journey of death. And what we're doing with these teachings and practices, in a certain way, is installing a kind of psychic global positioning system, a GPS, that will be available, access to you. It's completely kind of congruent, concordant to what happens when you work with things like dream incubation. They follow the same principles. Installing these kind of global positioning, general orienting systems that allow us to find our way in an otherwise bewildering set of experiences. So in addition, so I want to specifically start to introduce these formal nocturnal meditations because these have been a colossal contribution in my own experience, in my own life. I've probably written and taught more about these than any other. And so these 5 practices, I'll give you an overview of them now, and I'm going to start to introduce a couple contemplations that we can work with. These 5 nocturnal meditations are the following. This is my languaging, by the way. Nocturnal meditation is my neologism. And these 5 practices are the following. First one is liminal dreaming. I'll unpack all 5 of these probably in my next talk because it takes a lot of time. Liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, dream yoga, sleep yoga, also deeply connected, by the way, to what's called yoga nidra in the Hindu schools, and bardo yoga proper. So right at the outset, from the beginning of my talk 45 minutes ago, I've been talking about the 5th of the 5 nocturnal meditations. They follow a particular pattern that's pretty cool, kind of this Hegelian narrative of transcend but include. And so what this means is that liminal dreaming is the first one. This is that period when you head hits the pillow when you fall asleep, or haven't fallen asleep yet. Head hits the pillow, that kind of plasma gap dimension, when you're not quite awake, you're not quite asleep, that's called liminal dreaming. There's an array of practices that we'll be exploring there. That matures into lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming transcends but includes liminal dreaming. It uses liminal dreaming as a platform, but goes beyond. Dream yoga then does the same thing with both lucid dreaming and dream yoga. Same with sleep yoga. Same with bardo yoga. So we've started at the top with a practice, bardo yoga, that transcends but includes all 5. And so these practices come into play because liminal dreaming is what brings meditation, awareness, mindfulness, lucidity in an archetypal sense to the process of falling asleep. Lucid dreaming and dream yoga. So just, I guess, briefly, lucid dreaming is that dimension of awareness when you're dreaming. Something clues you into the fact that you're dreaming. You still remain in the dreaming state, but now you're conscious. It's a form of metacognition, hybrid state of consciousness, where you're now fully conscious and aware in a dream. You maintain lucidity in the dream state. Basically, it's used in contradistinction to dream yoga as for purposes of psychological transformation, self-fulfillment. In contradistinction to dream yoga is more about self-transcendence, and it's more spiritual than psychological. And so we have that narrative. Dream yoga transcends but includes the previous two. Sleep yoga, which is, believe it or not, when you maintain complete lucidity and awareness in deep, dreamless sleep. This is an extraordinary claim. Thomas Metzinger, arguably one of the world's leading philosophers, he's studying this now actively, and he says when this is substantiated, it hasn't been proven scientifically yet. This will be a revolution in the mind sciences. And so the assertion here is that awareness of absence is not absence of awareness. There is still a very subtle, tacit awareness that continues through the deep, dreamless space. As we'll see in a second, this is analogous to a similitude, concordant experience that we can experience every night of what it is that actually continues in this formless dimension. And then all four of these, of course, reach their crown, their fruition in the Bardo yoga practices. So let's do this for just a second so we don't forget. Let's take another, I want to do the briefest commentary on this. Let's take another sip of space, the power of a pause with one breath meditation. And then I'm going to tell you why we're doing this as a transition into the nocturnal practices. Okay, so literally, second meditation session for the day coming up. One breath. Sip of space. Doesn't take long to work with the power of the pause. This is Bardo yoga moment to moment. Doesn't take long to just hit the pause button. Ventilate your being with a sip of space. And in relationship to where we're going, what we're doing here, when you fall asleep, in inner yogic theory, when you're falling asleep, you're unwinding. Well, playing on this word, you're unwinding. You're unwinding. And this is of some importance in the kind of Eastern medical schools on inner yogic theory, because one of the major reasons we physically get diseased, which then reiterates in the cumulative disease that we see in the meta crisis today, is the elements are out of balance. Within and without, the elements are out of balance. And one of the biggest things going on here, arguably, is there's too much wind. There's too much of the wind element, not enough earth. If you didn't unwind it or unwind, you would suffer from the #1 sleep disorder. There's over 108 of these, which is one of the 7 forms of insomnia. So this is the first intimation of how the mind falls into itself. Every night when we fall asleep, in really deep meditation, that's what happens. And also in the third iteration, this is what happens allegedly when we die. We have to unwind, we have to unwind. And so unwinding with breath meditations like the one breath practice, pranayama, all the host of practices, Wim Hof method, all the things that are out there these days, resonant breathing, coherent breathing. These are all ways to actually help restore the elements. And this is in fact why sleep is so restorative from an inner yogic theory point of view. It basically almost forces the elements to come back into harmony. Exactly what happens when we get sick. We're forced to what? Forced to bed, forced to rest. So the one thing I didn't say that I do have to interject at this point to show you how what I'm about to say connects with what I've already said is that there are 3 death bardos. So just a 1-minute interjection here to put a little bit of clarity. Bardo principle is subdivided into 6 classic bardos, 3 in life and 3 in death. The three death bardos are the painful bardo of dying, the luminous bardo of dharmata, and the karmic bardo of becoming. Obviously, massive topic, but here's how it's important to us. Falling asleep every night is a similitude, a concordant experience of the painful bardo of dying. Falling into deep, dreamless sleep is a concordant experience or similitude of the luminous bardo of dharmata. And then dreaming is a concordant experience or similitude of the karmic bardo of becoming. And so playfully, every night is a pop quiz for the final exam. So the more we can bring a quality of mindfulness, lucidity in the archetypal sense, awareness to the journey of what takes place every single night, according to these inner dream yoga traditions. You'll find this, by the way, in Sufi dream yoga. You'll find this in Jewish mystical post-Kabbalistic dream yoga. You'll find it in the Taoist tradition, and you'll definitely find it big time in the Tibetan tradition. They work with these inner yogic principles. If you can bring lucidity and awareness to this journey, this is no small thing. And this is where we have to tie in to the deeper rendering of what dream actually is. Dream in this business is code language. It's a code word for the manifestation of mind. So in other words, we're always in a dream. And this also answers, just parenthetically, probably the most common question I'm asked: where do you go when you die? Where do you go after you die? Well, just like the movie Inception, basically you transition from one dream to the next. And so understanding this, and the Buddhist tradition talks about three types of dreams, which I'm going to mention in about 2 minutes. But in order to substantiate even that upcoming statement, I want to talk to you a little bit about how understanding the nature of the dream, how mind manifests in the dream space, helps us understand the nature of mind and reality. One of my favorite living philosophers, 2 PhDs, computer science and continental philosophy, Bernardo Kastrup, he writes a couple of things here that are definitely worth sharing. It does not entail that there is a universe outside mind, for the same reason that the external, quote unquote, world of your dreams does not entail anything happening outside of your dreaming mind. If reality is a kind of shared dream, then it is your body that is in the dream, not the dream in the body. And so here's where it helps, just hang with me for just a second, to tie this into one of the principal contributions of chaos and complexity theory over the last couple of decades. This extraordinary modern iteration of a proverbial perennial adage. In the Hermetic tradition, they talk about as above, so below. In the Kala Chakra Tantra, they talk about as within, so without. What I'm getting at here is that all these teachings, East and West, I've been suggesting it, reality is iterative. Reality is reiterative. You can see this in the images of things like fractals and the like. There's different levels of magnification of the same principled nature of the phenomenal display of reality. And so with this in mind, and this is where I'm going with everything that I've said and what I'll be doing in my upcoming 2 talks, there are fundamentally 3 types of dream. And we're going to be exploring all 3 of these. We already started. First, not necessarily in order of priority, the nighttime dream. Literally, wonderful, interesting kind of nomenclature called the double delusion or the example dream. How interesting is that? The double delusion, which intimates and suggests this is the second dream, the primary dream, this delusion. Precisely what the Buddha, arguably the ultimate lucid dreamer, his name literally means the awakened one, woke up to, the dreamlike nature of reality. Ironically, that's what constituted the Buddha's awakening. This is what he discovered underneath the tree. And so we have the double delusion. We study the double delusion. This is what dream yoga and sleep yoga is all about, to help us understand the primary delusion, to wake up to the dream of life. And a way to say this is lucid dreaming, using that languaging, leads to lucid living. It's a bidirectional process, a bidirectional practice. But even more compellingly for us, it's not basically bidirectional, it's tridirectional. Because according to these wisdom teachings, lucid dreaming not only pings back to lead to lucid living, it pings forward to lead to lucid dying, conscious dying. The capacity to literally maintain awareness and lucidity, not only through the night, which is what accomplished adepts in these nocturnal meditations can do, but the third type of dream is literally called the dream at the end of time, maintaining lucidity through the transition into the bardos at the end of our lives. And so this is fundamentally what these practices are going to be taking us towards. And so we're going to now work with, oh, you get to see, this is my beautiful dog, Tashi. Sorry, hopefully he won't bark. I'm now going to introduce you to a contemplation. So it's not just me chatting away here. I want to introduce you to a practice that we can engage in between now and when I meet with you again, that I think will lead some really interesting insights for you. So this is a dream yoga contemplation. The idea here is to look at your nighttime dream from the perspective of waking consciousness and see if the following that I'm going to say for you is not in fact true for you. So last night, right? Think of any dream you had last night or the night before, right? Did you have a nice dream? Did you have some nice dream adventures? Did you have all kinds of experiences? I did a series of experiments in my lucid dreaming, dream yoga curriculum like 20 years ago. Over the course of a couple of months, I went through this little kind of self-guided course where I said, geez, can I experience pain in the dream? Can I experience smells and tastes and sounds? And over the course of a couple of weeks, I was actually, through lucid dreaming, able to see, yep, every single thing, every single experience I can experience in the waking state, I can experience in the dream. I can have night terrors. I can have ecstatic orgasmic experiences in the dream. Everything I experience in waking life, I can experience in the dream. So this morning when you woke up, did you mourn the death of your dream avatar? Because that the notion that you have a dreamer in the dream, that's your dream avatar. When you woke up this morning, your dream avatar died. Did you write an obituary for it? Did you call your relatives and friends? Are you grieving about the death of your dream avatar right now? Of course not. Of course not. Why? Because you have the right view. You understand what's actually happening. So here's how this applies, because what I'm talking about now is going to be, according to this tradition, this is exactly what happens when we die at the dream at the end of time. So what happens is every night when you fall asleep, a part of your mind stream temporarily dissociates like a whirlpool in a stream. And my friend Bernardo Kastrup has helped me with this. It's like a temporary form of dissociative identity disorder. This is what creates the illusion of a living dream avatar in the course of your dream. When you wake up in the morning, what happens? That temporary nocturnal dissociation reassociates back into your mind stream. The avatar dies back into your mind stream and you continue on with your daily life, right? So exactly upon awakening, when this reassociation takes place, this tradition says same thing's going to happen when you die. Who you think you are right now is nothing more than another iterative dissociation. This is why the principle of reiteration is so important. The same process, phenomenology that we can study with the double delusion, the example dream, extrapolate, infer, take those insights back into this dream, and you'll come up to some really profound revelatory insights. So who you think you are right now is nothing more than an iterative dissociation. And what the philosophers, there's so many names for this. They talk about it as the infinite field of subjectivity, mind at large. The wisdom traditions have dozens of names for it. Turiya in the Hindu tradition, Ayin sometimes in the Jewish tradition, Rigpa, Dharmakaya in the Buddhist tradition. It doesn't matter what you call it. But this fundamental stream, this mind stream, is who you really are that we talked about 45 minutes ago. This is the part of you that doesn't die. This is the part of you that doesn't crystallize into an ego sense. This is the part of you that doesn't enter the world of space, time, and therefore causality. And if we can start to transfer our identity from these different iterations of dissociation to these deeper reassociated dimensions of our being, this is no small thing. This is how you can see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Test it against your experience in meditation or in these nocturnal meditations. See for yourself the truth of this. Test this out for yourself. When you die, that dissociation, who you think you are right now, just dissolves back into the field of infinite subjectivity. If you know this in your bones, right? That death is merely slipping back into the mind stream of reality itself. You don't think this is going to change the way you die? So my friend Bernardo, this is what he says. There is absolutely no reason to think that your consciousness will end when your body dissolves into an entropic soup. I love that term, when you die. At least no more reason you have to believe that you physically die when your avatar in a dream dies within the dream. When your avatar dies in a dream, the real you just wakes up in another state of mind, another dream. Maybe life and death are entirely analogous to dreaming and waking up, respectively. Well, I think Bernardo is being very humble and somewhat cautious here. I would say it's not maybe analogous. I would say it's a highly concordant similitude experience of what will happen. So one last contribution from him, and then I'm going to leave you with a contemplation. I'm going to discuss one more contemplation that we can engage in. I'm going to invite you to play with this between when I meet with you next time. So you can, again, go through this pedagogical process. So it's not just me flapping my wing, blowing all this information at you. See if these experiences are true for you. Engage in these contemplations. Engage in these suggested meditations. Kick the tires, test the teachings, and see if what these great beings are saying resonates with your experience. So, one final statement from Kastrup, and then I'll give you a little homework assignment. If consciousness is that within which birth and death unfold as phenomenal processes, then neither birth nor death can bear any relevance to the existential status of consciousness itself. Again, the deepest part of you that does not die because it was never born. Back to him. Death and the ultimate dissolution of the body can only be the image of the end of the dissociation. This means, and this is outrageous, this means that death correlates with an expansion of our felt sense of identity. This conclusion is the exact opposite of what mainstream materialism asserts. This is an amazing statement. Talk about the difference between right and wrong view. In the wrong view of materialism, when you transition at the end of life, it's lights out. It's a massive contraction and reduction of awareness until it's utterly ceased. Well, in the right view, it's just completely the other way around. Death, as I'm going to talk about in my upcoming 2 talks, is in fact the grand opening, the grand expansion. And so the conclusion is the exact opposite of what mainstream materialism asserts. So here's the final contemplation I want to leave you with, and we can have our brief discussion if you'd like. I simply want to invite you, it's very simple, over the next couple nights, to take a very close look at your experience. Pay attention to how you fall asleep. Pay attention to how you dream. And then pay attention to how you awaken. And then underneath it all, ask yourself, who's falling asleep? Who is it that dreams? Who is it that wakes up? Who is it that's awake right now? Another way to ask this that drives this point home into what we've been talking about, who is alive right now? Who dies? And if you believe in the rebirth reincarnation thing, who is it or what is it that actually takes rebirth? So if we engage in this, it's not mere philosophy, it's a type of soteriology. It's a way that these contemplations lead to liberating forms of insight. And so I want to leave you with that. I think that's probably enough information for this session. I don't want to go into the TMI overload section. So perhaps if you have any questions or comments or offerings or challenges, if something doesn't land with you, I'm more than happy to engage in some conversation around this. So please, more than welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. You've offered us so much rich insight and speak so deeply with your lived experience as the source of your speaking. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm going to just do a housekeeping question, which is people are asking you to kindly spell Bernard's last name.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Bernardo Kastrup, Kastrup. I'm a huge fan of Bernardo's. He's written about a dozen books. He's the leading voice in the world of what's called analytic idealism. And he's worth knowing about because with his prodigious powers of rationality, logic, intellect, he's basically come through the powers of analysis to these extraordinarily resonant insights that are proclaimed by the wisdom philosophies and spiritual traditions. And I've had the great good opportunity to befriend him. He's just an amazing person, especially for people who roll in the academic scientific world. He has a unique capacity to act as a bridge to basically overthrow the tyranny of materialism. In fact, the quotes that I referred to comes from one of his most popular books, the title of which is so cool, Why Materialism is Baloney.
Thank you.
His work is no baloney. For the deeper divers, the idea of the world, a multidisciplinary argument for the mental nature of reality. For the heavy lifters listening, this book will change your life.
Thank you. The next question is, why would one devote any time or energy to taking care of one's body? Is it for the purpose of sustaining the practice time to extend the time for hearing, contemplating, and meditating? Or is there some other reason that we support the perpetuation of the physical body?
Yeah, great question. Well, that's half the reason. That's half the answer. Absolutely, yes. To maintain the opportunity of this incredibly precious life that we have, this extraordinary opportunity we have as beings living in the West with freedom to engage in studies and teachings and practices for our own, improvement. But the reason I say it's half of it, the other half, arguably more important, is so that we can do what we do in the first half and bring it to benefit to others, to help others, to help this world. And this is one of my big rants these days, is that if what we're doing with these teachings and these practices, if it's not of benefit to the world, it's irrelevant. And so this is important. We use the gift of this body as a way to develop our capabilities fundamentally of being of more and more benefit to more and more people. As far as I can tell, that's the only game in town.
Could you extend that insight to speak about your observed experience in your own life or in those you have studied with and practiced with regarding when the fear of death is still strong, how that interrupts the service towards others?
Oh, yeah, that's really beautiful. Well, it no longer does. It actually connects me and catalyzes my service to others. And when I work with, if you come back on the meditation day, we're going to be doing a really beautiful kind of integrated somatic affective emotional experience around this and how to work with fear and how to transform it. But in this notion of transforming obstacle into opportunity, the essence of this particular presentation, we can work with transforming this obstacle of fear. And in a certain sense, we're doing it with what I just riffed on for the last hour. Because take a look and you'll see that fear is just the affective expression of ignorance. We're afraid of what we don't know. And that's why so many people, this is so interesting, so many people are so afraid of the end of life because they don't really know what's going to happen. And one just very brief but super important interjection here is that our fear of death is a secondary, actually inauthentic fear. This is important. The real fear is the fear that we're already dead, the fear of our inherent non-existence, the fear of emptiness. That's the real fear. And so this is the work, extraordinary work of David Loy in his book, Lack and Transcendence. What we do here that is beyond profound is we deny, repress, and project the fear of our own inherent non-existence. What I talked about 45 minutes ago is this selflessness, this deep selfless nature that we're fundamentally, on one level, we want more than anything, but on another level, we're terrified more than anything. So we deny it, the denial of death, we repress it, we project it. Where? As far away as we possibly can, which is the end of life. And so what we do then is we load, it's totally unfair to death, which is neutral. We completely plaster death with all our projections. And so this ties into a very powerful, I'm saying this because this is a big deal. This ties into a very powerful adage in the philosophical tradition, starting with Jung and others. When something affects you more than it informs you, you're probably dealing with a projection. Well, what affects us more adversely than death? Can you think of anything? Why does it affect us so much? Because we've projected the crap out of it or all our crap into it. And so partly what takes place on this journey, this brings it into the psychological arena, is deepest shadow work, integrating these shadows, owning up, taking ownership of this thing called fear. What are we really afraid of? And by understanding this, wow, no small thing.
That's a whole talk in itself.
Isn't
Thank
it? It
you.
is. I didn't mean to like hit overload button, but
Very, very illuminating. And just to extend it one step further, the fear of non-existence, its relationship to the materialism, how the grasping of the material.
yeah. Well, this is exactly why we grasp. Oh, this is so great. This is exactly why we grasp. So let's do a very brief thought experiment. I love this one. It's kind of a goth thought experiment. So wherever you are, we're all sitting in our special little places all over. Now imagine, just imagine the chair, the floor, everything from underneath you is just yanked out, just like as if you were slipping on ice, right? Just a thought experiment, an emotional, affective experiment. The chair goes out from underneath you, the floor goes out from underneath you, and you're sent flying. Well, this is exactly what the traditions say is going to happen when we die. It's actually happening now in a sublimated fashion. And what do we do when the rug gets pulled out from underneath us? This is classic Bardo experience. We grasp. And so we grasp as a way to reinstantiate the very sense of ground itself. This is such a big deal. So we grasp after things because we think that they exist. That's a materialistic approach. And we do that as a way to actually grasp and generate the very sense of self. So I don't know how far down this rabbit hole you want to go, but this is another one that goes pretty darn far. So it's intimately connected, the whole view of materialism, why we grasp, both on ontological levels, affective levels, and epistemological levels. So it's another one of these. This is the really cool thing, Theo, about these Bardo teachings. They're like reality concentrates. They're so dense. There's so much here because this is the dimension that, from which everything arises and the dimension to which everything returns. And that's why these teachings are so dense, so concentrated.
Thank you for making them digestible for us.
I try.
We have a few more questions.
Okay.
One, just again, housekeeping. Please restate the three things that we've been invited to pay attention to over the next few nights.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. So the invitation here, and we're going to really talk about this because it's such a compelling and revelatory investigation, is to basically just be curious, be inquisitive, like what did Socrates say? The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, examine, pay attention to, be mindful of how you fall asleep. Just simply pay attention, bear witness to what happens when you fall asleep. And then, to whatever extent, just kind of want to perfume your night with this intentionality. Pay attention to how you fall asleep, who falls asleep. When you're dreaming, you can do this either if you have a lucid dream, good for you, do it within the dream. Otherwise, do it retrospectively from the waking space. Who is it that's dreaming? Who falls into deep dreamless sleep? Who wakes up? So in other words, this leads to the most profound queries. I mean, this is basically just to give you an idea of where we're going with this. This is the seed inquiry that constituted the entirety of Ramana Maharshi's entire spiritual path. This is one way to work every night with this very powerful inquiry. Who am I? Who am I? Who falls asleep? Who dreams? Who wakes up? Who dies? Who goes through the bardos? Who comes back if you believe in that sort of thing, right? So this is a way to work using this triangulated approach with this process as it takes place in a microcosmic form every single night. Okay?
Thank you. Another question. How can we think about these teachings for ourselves and our family or friends who are currently in the ICU and who may not have clarity due to the medication, perhaps
Yeah.
that they're currently on?
It's a really lovely, sensitive question, a lovely, quote unquote, a very sensitive question. Well, this again ties into the notion of the relationship of wrong view to right view and the view of materialism to, I haven't formally declared this view, but in philosophical terms, I think I mentioned Bernardo's approach to idealism. World is not made of matter. Nobody's actually ever experienced matter. World is made of heart, mind, spirit. And so if we can make this transition, then what we realize is that when the person is in ICU and they're basically unable to communicate or they're being affected by sedative drugs and whatnot, what's actually taking place is the outermost dimension of our being. Remember, I said you can't deny physicality. We just challenge the status of that physicality. At that level, when they're in the sedated arena, what's taking place, the sedations, the medications, and everything matters, gross matters working with gross levels of mind. But what we're working with here is more interiorly oriented. It's more subtle. It's actually deeper. You know, what we're talking about, the mind in the gross dimension is an epiphenomenal display of these subtle processes that we're talking about here. So what takes place then is through deep conviction in these teachings and practices, we can work with them and we can communicate with them at these deeper, more intuitive sorts of levels. Because the farther down the rabbit hole you go, the more collective the experience becomes. It's only at the superficial exterior-most dimension of our being that we have this fallacious notion of self and other in space and time and causality. When you drop below that in the dream space, in deep meditation, these contemplations, well, not only do you connect the deeper, truer dimensions of your being, well, you connect the deeper, truer dimensions of other beings as well. And so therefore you can help people. It's kind of what I playfully call stealth help. You can therefore help people at these deeper levels. This is where prayer takes place. This is where blessings take place. This is where the transfer of merit takes place. This is where these seemingly miraculous cures and whatnot of levels of communication take place that only seem miraculous from a superficial, materialistic, physicalist dimension. At these deeper dimensions, and if you understand this view, you can empower this, we have a lot more power than we think if we just simply don't allow ourselves to reify and concretize everything at these superficial levels.
Thank you. Zooming out to a larger perspective than all that you've already offered, the next question asks, why is it that the human form exists? In this process of connecting with life itself and life re-entering its connection to its essential self, why does the body form exist at all?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. You know, it's a matter. This is where I think it's very helpful to bring in integral perspective. So I didn't really mention that the way I roll. Yes, I'm a card-carrying Buddhist for tax purposes, but I'm basically more curious, and I guess you could say I'm an integralist. I'm very interested in integral approaches. And so what I mean here is that there's nothing inherently problematic whatsoever in this evolutionary thing we call body and its relationship to the seemingly external world. We need our bodies. If we didn't have our bodies, we wouldn't be here talking about the nature of our bodies. So on an evolutionary level, using this Hegelian notion of transcend but include, we need fear. We need self another. Antigen and antibody, our immune systems wouldn't work. We couldn't function in the world without a body. The problem is not the body. The problem is how we reify it, solidify it, misappropriate it, and exclusively identify with it. That's the problem. And so what these teachings do is again, they attempt to cut through, to overthrow that kind of tyranny of appearance. And then what happens is you return to the body as a skillful mean, as a skill set, as I alluded to earlier, as a way to communicate with others. So there's nothing wrong with ego. It's just an arrested form of development. There's nothing wrong with the body. It's an absolute necessary part of the evolutionary thing. The issue is reification and arrested the relationship to those. And so if we have a higher view, importance of right view again, we can honor and incorporate the beauty, the brilliance of this form, this body while we have it, realizing it's a little bit like growing from age 18 to age 19. You don't kill age 18 when you go to age 19. You transcend but include it. You return as an 18-year-old to communicate with others that still identify at that level, but the view from on high is better. So this is important, this integral approach, because otherwise we set up adversarial relationships and start shadowboxing with ego and body and all these sort of things. There's nothing wrong with this. This is a more kind of alchemical tantric way of relating to form, relating to body. If it's related to fully and properly, and this is a wonderful segue to a meditation I'm going to be doing in a couple of days with you all, understanding and relating to form, to feeling, to body, 100%, this is a real game changer, magical way to establish a relationship to those things that we usually think we have to flee. No, no, no. We just have to relate to whatever we have and experiencing 100%, and the freedom is right there. So much more on that coming up. This is another very prescient question and something that's definitely on my docket to talk about and practice.
Wonderful. We have another question. Reading it, it says, in some non-dual traditional thought, I have sometimes understood or interpreted the idea of death as rejoining some, quote, wholeness. I think some of the world today is not just afraid of death, but of the loss of individual identity.
Yeah, sure.
And then in parentheses, modern capitalism hyper-individualizes us.
Totally. Again, it's a developmental thing. I couldn't agree more. This hyper-individuality, this is just another way to massage the notion of ego, the reified, shrink-wrapped self-sense. So it's a developmental issue. And by returning, here's the thing about returning to the wholeness. It's not like you dissolve, like Bernardo's language, into this anthropic soup and then just become the soup forever. No, what fundamentally happens is you reconnect. You literally, in the Platonic sense of anamnesis, Plato was onto this, the process of recollection. You're simply remembering, the play on word intended, you're simply remembering who you really are, this infinite, deathless, changeless wholeness. And so you don't just dissolve back into that and then hang out. No, you actually maintain recognition of that deepest dimension of your being, and you maintain it, you bring it with you. So then when you're acting in the world, you're acting from that space of wholeness and integration. So then when you come back into that individuated self sense, it's now an ornament. It's not an obstacle. It's an ornament to that wholeness. You therefore express that wholeness. In Hinduism, this is what's called turiyatita. Basically, you take that infinite awareness, you don't just hang out there, you bring it back into the world of form and you act. This is reincarnation at the moment to moment level. You act in the world from that transcendent unified space. this is really important because otherwise, in these non-dual traditions, it's a near enemy of the non-dual traditions, a subtle form of cosmological dualism, that you feel you somehow have to go back, return to some Garden of Eden type of thing. No, realize you never left the garden. You just have to relate to whatever's in front of you right now, and you realize this is it. So again, these questions are so great, right? Yeah, something like that.
Thank you so much for your wisdom so generously shared, and we look forward to being with you in your upcoming guided practice and your interactive workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tia. See you then.